Hey, this is Matt Baird from CULT3020, and today I have with me Perry Duffin. We'll be talking about the effect of digital culture and technology on the music industry, in particular the Australian music industry. And I think I'd like to start off today, Perry, with talking about the effect that piracy's had on music sales in the country.
Piracy has basically decimated the sale of CDs, but at the same time, it's become quite, I always think that it's gone back to the traditional way that it used to be, where musicians made most of their money from touring and minimal sort of amounts from the actual sale of records. But apparently in the 70s, 80s and 90s, when record companies really started to get big, they were taking like 90% of the profits, weren't they, anyway? So.
Well, they still do. If you've ever seen a contract for a band or anything like that, they usually only take about 4 cents in the dollar from any recording that they do.
That's brutal. Well, I know that that's why the actual way that they sign artists has changed a lot now. Instead of just, mostly focusing on the sale of CDs, record companies have a monopoly on like your appearance on a TV show or your radio interviews, things like that, or merchandise or your books that you put out later in life. That's how they're making their money now. So I wouldn't say that record companies are really in dire straits in any way or shape. They're too good for that as companies. But the artists, I don't know, is the actual artist's quality of life deteriorating at all?
Some will say it does. I suppose it all depends on who the artist is. Okay, you've got your massive bands like Coldplay and U2 that, cry themselves to sleep at night because they can't afford their pure gold boat, which probably won't float anyway. But then you've got, say, your more lower level bands like Grinspoon, who rose to fame through Triple J's Unearthed. They were the very first Unearthed contest winners, and you don't really hear much from them lately. Yeah, I know for a while there they were playing on halftime games at the NRL.
Now they play at the Doilo.
Yeah.
They were there 2 weeks ago, I think. Local clubs.
So yeah, well, they've all got to start focusing more on their touring, I suppose, to get that money, as you said.
So I often wonder, I think there might be a increasing divide between people who are very well known and can make all their money and people who are mid-range or low-range artists now. Like, is it becoming hard, is it harder to break into the industry now than it was, but it's easier for established artists because merchandising is becoming so much more significant? I think that's the question that people need to ask. Is there creating a big divide between famous and amateur?
I think it might be becoming a little bit harder to break into the industry for some of the indie people because the way the music industry is working now is we are focusing very much on body image. Any indie band that wants to make it big has to have a video for their hit single before they can even be picked up by a studio nowadays. But then again, that we've got these same indie artists going out and hawking their CDs at their gigs. First 20 people in the door get a free copy of REP. So I don't know if piracy on its own is really affecting the sale. I think people are starting to move forward from that. We have companies like iTunes, Amazon, who are now offering downloads relatively cheaply, and I think that's a smart way to move forward, rather than having all the files just being downloaded for free. They're sort of taking control of that medium a little bit. We're not going to put a stop to torrent or LimeWire. I don't think we want to, really, because people still
they'll always find a way.
They'll always find a way. But I think it's a better step than shoving DRM down our throat.
Absolutely. So I think then what is happening with record companies is that they're becoming an intermediary between places like iTunes and Amazon and the artists themselves. So they're the ones who control the back catalogs and stuff like that, the rights to sell on iTunes and then sell to the public again. So I think the real danger to record companies isn't the fact that people are downloading all their music once again. It's the fact that they could really be phased out by iTunes. Like iTunes could go straight to the artist if Apple decided to make a department for finding new talent. Then I think that would really phase out the record companies because they are becoming a little redundant, I'd say.
In that manner, yeah. But then again, they still hold control of merchandising and all that. And you've got to remember, these bands are signed onto a contract which they have to fulfill.
Yeah.
There is a story there about the Australian band Silverchair not wanting to finish off one of the albums that they were signed, the third album of their 3-album contract, so that they could go off and create their own indie label because they wanted more control over their music. So to be able to get out of that contract, they had to actually produce a third album. So what they did was they sent the company a CD full of white noise and said, "That's our recording, take it or leave it."
There you go. So
the companies can get screwed over a bit, but I suppose they did get their own back on Silverchair because they then went off and released their greatest hits. And Yeah. A greatest hit CD can really put a dampening on an artist.
Oh, who was it? I think it was Meatloaf who said once you've got a greatest hits, you're over.
Yeah.
Something like that.
It's a career killer.
Okay, well, I think the next point in the way that music's changed has mostly been the diversification of the way we access it, the internet and stuff like that. And firstly, the first reaction is, of course, as we discussed, to piracy. But more importantly, the way that it's changed is the way that CDs are consumed by people, because they still are consumed, or the way music is bought.
Yeah.
The first way that it's changed is that back in the day, if you wanted to buy a CD, you'd go to a record store. And for a CD to be in a record store, it had to be popular enough to occupy a spot on the shelves. There's only so much room for rent in a record store. And if you aren't popular enough, if you're not going to sell enough, then they're not going to stock you. But what's happened now is it's called long tail marketing, where a company like Amazon, which has been able to emerge because they run their shop via the internet rather than from a physical location, they basically can just rent, 50 warehouses in the middle of Idaho and, basically no rent, and fill them up with a bunch of obscure CDs, obscure books, films, stuff like that. And they really don't, they're not really limited by the physical space of a CD anymore. So they just stock everything.
So they can have, the 4 CDs
that no one else has ever heard of, and the weird, they probably have the White Noise Silverchair album there.
Yeah.
But
I don't think it got released, but brilliant. I'd love to hear it.
Oh yeah, should be on the second greatest hits, B-sides. But basically that's changed the way that people buy CDs now. You're now getting people, like, entire micro cultures, they call them, as below subcultures, below mainstream, where genres like breakcore can emerge and remain profitable because they can compete, for audiences, and you get people willing to consume basically any type of media. So basically what it's done is created like a really diverse set of tastes amongst people now, where 20 years ago you liked rock, or maybe you liked rap, stuff like that, or maybe people were divided along their favorite bands like Cultures or Guns N' Roses. But now people are divided along genres that no one else has even heard of. There's entire clubs and scenes and stuff that have emerged because long tail marketing has allowed people to listen to this music that before now has never really been able to compete with the super bands.
Yeah. And I suppose we see that a lot also with the download. You've started to get people, you look at my sister's iPod, for one, you've got Britney Spears next to Bullet for My Valentine, and she wouldn't bat an eyelid at that.
Yeah. Whereas
your usual marketing is Britney Spears is for Princess Teeny Boppers, and Bullet for My Valentine is for the heavy rockers.
Yeah.
Those death metal lovers, and they wouldn't think of putting those next to each other on a shelf in a store, but we've got people walking around with them on their iPods right next to each other in the B section.
Yeah, absolutely. It's completely changed the way that you can market CDs, and the way people consume it, like you said, is just genres are starting to be sort of broken down and fluid, and they emerge and collapse very quickly, faster than any record company would dare to try and capitalize on, really. I think that an important thing in the way that was done was the Amazon, I think it was the Amazon algorithm, I don't know the name for it.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Where they're the first company to basically, people who bought this also bought, and then another album. So it's basically taken out, once again, the role of a record company as an advertiser, as a promoter of music, because they are irrelevant, as you said, because people are consuming all kinds of different music all at once.
Yeah.
And so they can't market to them, but also because there's no point trying to sell music to people like that. People who pinball around, they can only really be helped by an algorithm like that. And I think a lot of companies wish they got their hands on that. I know Google wanted it, and they actually paid quite a bit of money to get it, just to sell every product. And that's sort of the way that music is being sold now. Pioneered that change.
So I suppose the other thing that we can say about how technology on its own is starting to evolve with the music industry is the ever increasing access to music recording software and hardware. I heard it said that today a $5,000 home studio can rival a $10 million studio from just 10 years ago, and we have people in their bedrooms creating music that would never ever be picked up by any of the major record labels, let alone some of the indie ones. But they're getting out there. We've got DJs getting out there with their mix-ups and their dubstep versions of pop songs, or small indie bands getting out there with, They're 3.5 minute rock songs that only ever get played at a pub when they're playing them. But now they're getting put on CDs and they can go out and sell them or hawk them off whenever they want. And it's really opened the floodgates, so to speak, of everyone being able to get their music out there. And that I don't think is a bad thing at all.
No.
Unless, of course, it's completely horrible, but that's all a matter of taste.
Yeah. That, once again, is a symptom of the digitization of music, where, like you said, technology has, firstly, the actual hardware has become a lot cheaper to just produce a quality sounding recording rather than tape hiss and, 2 CD players or 2 tape recorders actually recording into each other. You can now actually generate quality for not much money. And I think, once again, the internet has allowed people to upload that and share that. You get sites like MySpace, which had that strange early period where it thought it was a social network, but now it's just a place to discover musicians. But there's a lot of market on the internet for undiscovered musicians. Even Triple J is making use of the infinite space of the internet with the ability to upload any recording you want of yourself under the Unearthed section. So now
and they've also just released Unearthed Radio, which is a separate radio station to their main one. 24 hours unsigned indie bands from their Unearthed website, and they just pick a random song and play it.
So internet radio. Basically they're just trying to overcome the fact that there's finite space on the airwaves. There's finite time for people to listen to. You only get so many 3-minute songs and idle chit-chat per 24 hours. But the advent of home recording has been accompanied by the advent of internet radio, and they sort of have gone hand in hand in allowing just so many people to get their recording and their voice out there, which I think is an incredibly positive thing in the music industry. It's sort of completely bypassed, again, record labels determining taste.
Definitely.
And one final thing that springs from the digitization of music and the fact that the internet has basically allowed a space to upload music is that the internet isn't bound by geography. So basically what we are getting is a pervasive American influence across the whole of the internet. I think it was Thusu in his 2006 article who said that the internet is an American-built box, and because of that it will be always American.
Even though it's not.
Even though technically it is not, property of America. But basically the way things are shared is an American mode of thought.
Yeah.
So what we're getting is electronic colonialism theory is the complete terminology for it. And it basically means that the dominating nation, the dominating culture, which is American, uses stuff like popular music to influences the taste of, like, its colonies, and not official colonies, in the way we're a colony, we're a subordinate sort of power to them. We get all our TV and music from there, and that's the way that they change tastes and keep their business flowing. That's how they expand now. It's not through military acquisition, it's through the acquisition of the pop music, of the radio. So what they've done now in Australia is we're starting to get more American influences in there because of the internet, and we've been able to see people download, a bunch of old Jay-Z albums and then release American gangster rap with an Australian accent. Like the Hilltop Hoods spring to mind.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Yeah, and Listen-y, so there's a bunch. Even indie, I think, emerged largely as an English thing, didn't it? The Killers and such like that. They were, I think it had a big takeoff in France and stuff. Yeah, that's become like a really Australian, or influential to Australian musicians, all these genres, and they're not actually Australian sounding, which I found sort of interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, like we're getting, if you compare it to the 1970s, when there were songs like I Come From a Land Down Under, that would never really fly today. Like the Australian accent still has novelty value, even to Australians, but the identity of Australia is becoming more closely connected with America. We are becoming a colony through our music.
You see a couple of artists who sort of retain the Australian accent in their sounds. Missy Higgins comes to mind.
Yeah.
A couple of indie bands that I've heard over the years have that distinctly Australian accent in their main singer. But that is true. We have a lot of people, a lot of artists sounding like Americans, and I think that's also comes down to the fact that a lot of the singing teaching methods are coming from America, or most of the ones that we have. So most of our students that are getting taught music and being taught singing properly by a singing tutor are using an American system. So they're learning to sound out their vowels in an American way to hit the right notes.
Right.
But that's a bit of singing theory.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think that pretty much wraps us up. Perry, I'd like to thank you for coming in and helping me out with this.
Thank you for having me.
And so there we go.